Everybody, thanks for attending or listening wherever you are. I'm James Lanen from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and I'm the lead researcher for Western Alaska LCC study undertaking to document local knowledge of the Mulchatna caribou herd in relation to environmental change. The project title was Traditional Ecological Knowledge of the Mulchatna caribou herd, Phenology, Habitat Change, Subsistence Use, and Related Species Interaction. On some of the core results of the project, specifically focusing on our methodologies and our things regarding local knowledge of caribou abundance patterns, the dynamics of caribou ecology, environmental change, and hunter adaptation to change. It started in May 2016, and it will end in March of this year. Project and staff included myself, Chris McDevitt, Neufeld from the Alaska Department of Game Division of Subsistence, Gayla Hith from Bristol Bay Native Association, and Karen from Lake Clark National Park. This is our study area, which is the range of the Mulchatna caribou herd in southwest Alaska. Note that I'll use the acronym MCH for the Mulchatna caribou herd throughout this presentation. To target study communities which covered the full known range of the MCH. We have search approval with 13 communities, so at the bottom of the map and moving counterclockwise. It's Dillingham, Ekwok, New Stuyahok, Igiogig, Neck, Knowlton, Lime Village, Stone River, Queefluk, Bethel, Eek, and Toyak. So carrying an important part of the ecology of this region and an important subsistence resource for local residents for at least several thousand years. For example, archaeological studies in the Lake Clark National Park area have revealed evidence of caribou hunting dating back to 11,000 years ago. The region first inhabited during that time by Proto-Athabascan paleo hunters. Some of their ancestors would later become the Upper Stony River and Lake Clark Denaina people, who now continue to live in the eastern portion of the MCH range. The southern portions of the range are home to Yupik Eskimo peoples who have a history of caribou hunting in the region for multiple millennia. The caribou herd takes its name from its identified traditional calving grounds, which is the Upper Mulchatna River region in Alaska Game Management Unit 17B. And so the acronym I'll be using throughout the presentation is GMU for Game Management Unit. During the half of the 20th century, the MCH population began to grow substantially. It became a retained resource for residents of the Stony River, Lake Clark, Nishigak River, Illinois Lake, and Bristol Bay areas, and for non-local hunters from Alaska's urban areas. In the 1990s, the population peaked at about 200,000 caribou, and then the herd simultaneously began diminishing and expanding its range north and west. During the 70s, the MCH range was approximately 20,000 square miles. By the 2000s, its range had expanded to more than 60,000 square miles. A substantial portion of the herd became available to residents of the western side of the range, and from the western portion of the range have taken most of the subsistence harvest since the range expansion event. However, during this decade, the population reached a low of approximately 18,000. In 2015, it had shown an increase to over 30,000 caribou. During the 1990s, reported annual harvests peaked at over 5,000 caribou, but during a decade, the reported harvest not exceeded 466 caribou per year. This provides MCH population estimates and the number of reported harvests from 1974 to 2016. The herd population grew substantially to around 200,000 caribou in the mid-1990s and swiftly declined to its current population of approximately 27,000. And there you can see that harvest amounts followed the population trend. The project originated with this background and sought to understand the dynamics of the MCH from the perspective of local and traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK. Projects were to document TEK of caribou distribution over the previous 55 years, particular attention to environmental change. To shifts in abundance, shift subsistence uses of caribou by local residents, particularly related to access and transportation methods, and to understand local residents' capacity to adapt to ecological change, particularly in regard to shifting caribou distribution. Primary objectives were to gather spatial information on caribou distribution and movement through participatory landscape mapping sessions, and to produce a detailed map series which visually displays these observations. Integrate local and scientific knowledge to gain better insight into the patterns of change. The field method was participatory landscape mapping, with knowledge holders to record geospatially specific local knowledge. Mapping was conducted in conjunction with key responder interviews, which were used to interpret and contextualize what was recorded on maps. We were able to employ a limited amount of participant observation. Researchers physically accompany local hunters into the field in order to generate real-time, on-the-ground observations of the circumstances hunters face. So, recorded information going as far back in time as our respondents could provide. We established 1960 as the most realistic starting point for our geospatial inquiries. The theme of the interviews was to ask, over the past 5 decades, what is the local knowledge in relationship to movements, activities such as calving, caribou abundance, volcanic observations, vegetation establishment, landscape hydrology, such as wildfire, weather and snow conditions, other life conditions, and hunting strategies and access. We use maps for data collection, with scales ranging from 1 to 500,000 to 1 to 100,000. And information was recorded by hand using points, lines, and polygons. Graph maps were digitized by hand, drawing data into ArcMap. Over the established 5.5-decade study time frame, all map data was recorded according to its relevant decade. To coverage of the full time span and the full scope of ecological and subsistence variables, we brought multiple field maps to each interview, including to cover different spatial scales. 17 different field maps were used to conduct the study. In order to sort the data, hand-drawn features were coded to a predefined list of categories and variables. This is our coding sheet and the various codes we use to sort our data. All of the recorded features were coded according to these data categories. As it was recorded, it received both a season and a decade, or multiple seasons and multiple decades. When the connections between any of the variables, they were combined using the symbol X. For example, with the codes there, a common combination was C times D times 29 times winter to spring times 1980 through the 2000s. So that code, it was a caribou hunting location with congregated caribou and normally shallow or non-dense snow during winter and spring from 1980 to 2009. Maps were produced or submitted to our GIS staff for digitization. All elements were entered and categorized with an assigned code into both ArcGIS and a table database. Suite coded geospatial data, which I like to call puzzle pieces, that are analyzed by their specific time frames and functions to establish possible patterns. Through this, we can then layer individually coded elements of data into topic-specific maps, which attempt to display patterns, shifts, and trends in the social ecological system from the perspective of local knowledge. In the project, we set out to produce a set of comprehensive final maps which highlight the discovered patterns using a similar process shown in the figure here, which is a conceptual example of GIS layer production from a study of geospatial local knowledge in a marine environment. Using maps which layered the social science data we collected, our project had the goal to also integrate TEK data with data from the biological sciences. In a series of maps, we successfully integrated layers containing Alaska Department of Fish and Game, radio collar, and calf data, and we analyzed MCH harvest data to contextualize what we learned from local knowledge. Our real goal was to also integrate geospatial environmental change data into our maps, but we were not able to successfully layer relevant change data we discovered. Alternative, side-by-side comparisons of both TEK and Western knowledge, we did produce figures for Caribou and Mesa screening trend and data in Alaska frame-based ecosystem code, or FRESCO. Okay, before moving on to show you some of our results, I want to summarize that workflow process I just described. First, begin with our relevant base maps, then we get the field with codes for the variables we plan to study, and with enough paper maps to cover the desired spatial and temporal scale. Interviews, finalize our field maps, enter the data for GIS layer production. Then, where possible, we incorporated any relevant biological data. From here, we produce maps based on the patterns discovered through analysis of raw data. So we can field work through a number of trips into the study area, and we ended up completing 32 mapping interviews with residents across the range of the Mulchatna Caribou herd. A total of 5 field maps were produced from those interviews. So in one community, we were able to actually get out hunting with residents and conduct participant observation. While in open detail, we obtained over 55 years of TEK data on the ecology of the Mulchatna Caribou herd and its habitat. A comprehensive final report is currently in press, which includes results of study topics listed in the slide. Time to go over all these results today, so I've selected some of the topics that I think people will find most interesting. For the presentation, I'll discuss the overall range and abundance of the MCH and the range expansion and population decline. I'll discuss observations of environmental change and adaptive considerations regarding hunter access challenges. One of inquiry was to understand local knowledge of caribou abundance over space and time. Terms scattered, small bunches, lots, hundreds, or thousands were descriptions often given by respondents in relation to specific scales of space and time. In our results, we found it difficult to be too precise in our interpretation of these descriptions of caribou abundance, so we settled on 2 general categories of TEK described caribou abundance, concentrated and scattered. Concentrated as primary range, or areas where large aggregations of caribou or an abundance of caribou were observed or expected. And we define scattered as areas where single or small groups of caribou were encountered, or where the possibility of encountering caribou exists. These categories was an overall local knowledge assertion that the MCH should not be viewed as a single unit. The MCH exists disparately across its range throughout the year. Larger migrating and congregating together at times, and smaller groups always remaining scattered about. One elder said there are 2 which pretty much stay in one area, and then there are others which travel all over. Sometimes they're concentrated, usually they are not. Pre-EK descriptions of scattered caribou suggested that the local knowledge interpretation of the MCH is one of a larger population consisting of local populations. Interpretation corresponds impressively with scientific interpretations of the MCH as a metapopulation. If you're interested in looking further into this, I recommend viewing King et al. Reference cited on the slide. Moving on to show you some maps. Note also that what I'm showing you is still preliminary. We're getting comments back from reviewers. Some of the details are subject to change in our final reporting. Local knowledge of caribou locational abundance for 2 decades, 1960 through 1979. Note that the area of primary caribou concentration is the eastern portion of the range. The blue area is colored pink. All defined scattered as simply the possibility that caribou could be present. The overfinding from the interviews was that local residents believe that there has always been the possibility of encountering scattered caribou through most of the MCH range. Where local observations of caribou occur in the mountainous areas of GMU 17A and date prior to the 1990s likely pertain to the killbuck caribou herd, which is a distinct herd that was absorbed by MCH during its later range expansion. In the 1980s, knowledge depicts a slight western, southern, and northern range expansion. This correlates with population estimates from the 1980s, which showed the MCH population rising from 20,000 caribou to 60,000 caribou. This local knowledge abundance data on top of locational kernel densities obtained from radio collar MCH caribou during the 1980s. Take into consideration the fact that not all caribou are radio collars, and characterizing local knowledge is very general and not as specific as that obtained from radio collaring. Concentrated category depicted by local knowledge lines up fairly well with scientific knowledge. Although we see that there are some telemetry locations to the east which are in areas that did not fall into the local knowledge category at all. And I note that in the upper left-hand corner of our integrated maps, we have included the caribou population trend graph for reference. As seen in this map, local knowledge depicts significant range expansion and population growth during the 1990s. Corresponding estimates from the 1990s show the MCH population rising dramatically from 80,000 caribou in the early part of the decade to approximately 200,000 caribou in 1995. Our map for the 1990s displays overall general alignment between local and scientific knowledge. Although there are radio collar kernel densities which span well to the north and south of the mapped local knowledge boundaries. In the 2000s, local knowledge depicts an overall shift in caribou abundance to the west and northwest. All concentrations of caribou remain in the east. And our map for the 2000s displays steady alignment between local and scientific knowledge during this decade. As what is occurring on the ground in the previous two maps, it's important to note that population estimates showed a dramatic decline from the mid-1990s high of 200,000. By 2008, it was estimated that there were only about 30,000 caribou. We don't see much change from the 2000s in caribou locational abundance from the local knowledge side. And our map for the 2010s continues to display mostly sturdy alignment between local and scientific knowledge. That the population estimates for this decade range from around 18,000 caribou in 2013 to over 30,000 in 2015. And also, I mentioned that most of our interview respondents reported signs of recovery and increasing caribou abundance in the central and eastern areas of the herd's range. How does local knowledge interpret this population and range shift? It's revealed that local knowledge views these dynamics as resulting from a combination of factors, including overgrazing, that the population grew so large that it didn't have enough food. For example, there was a known epidemic of foot rot. Also discuss observations of declines in calving abundance and increasing predation by wolves. We only mentioned liberalized hunting by non-local hunters during the 1980s and 1990s as being a contributing factor. For the presentation, I'm going to be reading interview comments because it's important that local people get to speak for themselves on this stuff. A correspondent in GMU 17B said, for about 20 years they were abundant, and then all of a sudden they started declining. And when they just moved over to the other side, seeing many caribou, there were too many. They got so big they ate up all the lichen and were grazed, and they got some kind of hoof disease. It was hunting during the 70s, 80s, 90s, then 2000, all of a sudden they disappeared. We have to go 30 miles, sometimes even 5 miles to get caribou, but not anymore. What they did was they went over towards Shotgun Hills, over towards the Bethel area, towards the west. In contrast, the people we interviewed in the northern and western areas of the range described the sudden appearance of a mass of caribou. The Pi-Mute respondents said, when they poured the country, it was like a dream. The fundamental change in caribou habitat data we were able to map had to do with the grazing event described by interview respondents, who pointed large areas of good habitat in the eastern areas of the MCH range. They said that a richness of healthy in the Multi River watershed had allowed herd to grow and expand during the 1980s and 1990s, but that they had become heavily overgrazed, leading the MCH mass to expand its range. And this can see the areas which, according to local knowledge, became overgrazed during the 1990s. And there are two types of caribou movement: normal seasonal movements and movement associated with range expansion. That is the patterns of MCH range expansion interpreted by local knowledge, which largely associates these movements with population and overgrazing-related dynamics. Internally, respondents from the eastern area of the range reported observations that habitat conditions are improving in the form of overgrazed areas, and they delineated the regions where they have observed signs of recovering lichen pastures. And they also said that caribou populations were now increasing again as a result. Options of changing winter conditions were consistent in our interviews. We frequently discussed ice breakup occurring earlier in the spring and freeze up occurring later in the fall, and mild warm winters with less reliable ice conditions, less than snowfall amounts, and an increased frequency of rain-on-snow events. Nick Elder said, we're experiencing warmer falls now. It never freezes as early as it used to, and very mild and very rainy during the winter. The snow gets soft and then freeze, and it all turns to ice. And an elder said, springtime for us is usually considered April to May. For the lower years, March has become the new spring. Snowing a lot faster in the spring now. All of the lake opening up quicker and thawing faster. Would not happen until May, but now it's thawing in March. It is normally starting in late April, but 2016, all the ice was gone by April. The polygons in this map display areas identified by respondents where frequent snowmelt, late and consistent freeze-up, early ice breakup, or winter rain and ground icing has been occurring over approximately the last 15 years. The green polygons depict low observations of changing sea ice conditions in Togiak Bay. The blue polygons show areas of shallow or non-dense snow. These are generally windswept areas where caribou are known to winter because the lack of snow allows them easier access to lichen. Vegetation change in the study area was also a consistent theme in many interviews we conducted. Observations centered mostly on expanding and taller growing deciduous shrubs and also early leaf out in spring and greening during winter. Here's comments. A correspondent said, more brush all over. The last 20 years there's more brush. Upriver all over. We have a climatic change. It has gotten warmer and the brushes grow more. On the river, we never used to see brushes in the sandbars, but now they're all over. I see that, not just the sandbars, but along the creeks. And Nick Elder said, it's gotten more brushy because of this warm weather and not as harsh of winter. Trees are growing better. Togi Elder said, grass leaves are now staying green longer than normal. And sometimes in winter, we've seen green, especially in the places where it hardly freezes. When it stays warm, all of a sudden the grass grows back up.
We gotta tag it. Yeah, we do that.
A reminder, everyone, please mute your phones. You can hear some laughter in the background. Thank you.
Okay. Space and change in the study area was also a consistent theme in many of the interviews we conducted. Ways areas of significant deciduous vegetation change depicted by our respondents. These were mostly confined to riparian areas. The prime species mentioned was willow, followed by dwarf birch. Others were mentioned less frequently. This is of an area shown to me by a non-Dalton hunter, which was formerly an open tundra edge meadow that has been colonized by these deciduous shrubs. So a few more quotes on vegetation change, because I think it's really important to show what people are saying. The new elder said there are a lot more brushes. The brushes are really tall now. There used to be only a few brushes. Now it's a brush. The leaves are bigger the last few years, and the berries grew earlier. And the elder said, today it is much more brushy than during all my previous lifetime, especially along the rivers and on the sandbars. We used to have trees. You can't even walk through them now. Earlier I mentioned that we utilize Western science data to compare the local knowledge data we obtained on environmental change. Of Southwest Alaska, taken from the Greening of the Arctic Trend Map, produced by you and Masick, which used Landsat data to depict the change in Normalized Differentiation Index, or NDVI, from 1984 to 2012. June analysis showed significant greening and browning across Canada and Alaska. Here we highlighted our project study area and can see that the NDVI data depicts significant greening in the eastern portion of our study area, in alignment with the observations provided by local knowledge. This map from the Sales Network for Alaska and Arctic Planning website, and then we log to it TEK deciduous vegetation change data obtained from our study. The base depicts the projection of vegetation change in our study area from 1900 to 2099. Alaska frame-based ecosystem code, or alfresco model, described up et al. 2000. Here, observations provided by local knowledge are generally complementary to the vegetation change predicted by model.
Yeah, everybody, what happened there?
Okay, big question. According to local knowledge, is there a relationship between locally observed environmental changes and the decline of the Mulchatna caribou herd? People don't really think so. Inconstant snow and ice conditions, which limit them from accessing caribou hunting locations during winter, would be the primary effect of environmental change on the caribou subsistence system. And vegetative changes were generally considered to not have significantly altered open tundra caribou habitat. A Kalignik elder said, I don't think the new brush had much anything to do with the caribou herd crash. The Yagik elder said, we don't have so much brush that it's really changing the tundra much. The sloughs and riversides have grown more and more large willows. The men only changed a little. And the elder said, towards the coast, you can definitely notice the habitat has changed a lot. River, tundra, and moss have not changed. The stayed mostly open. The broad encroached everywhere. Still plenty of nice tundra around here. But local knowledge, rather than affecting caribou, the primary influence of vegetation change in the large land mammal subsistence system increased moose abundance and increased moose harvest opportunities, especially in the southern portion of the study area. Birmingham hunter said, we've got lots of moose. Moose have become a lot more abundant. Now you probably get a moose, but it's much harder to get a caribou. An elk hunter said, the elders used to talk about moose. There was not much moose, but they used to see a couple of moose, but now there's a million moose. Or local knowledge views increasing moose abundance to be a result of climatically driven habitat enhancement, centered on the expanding health and growth of moose's favorite food, willows. The elder said, the moose population is growing well now. 15 years ago it started growing. It went from almost 0 to 600, partly due to the new feed from all the growing willows, and also because we stopped hunting out of season and stopped hunting for cow moose. said moose have been increasing because of the warm winters. There's better willows for feeding. Moose eat willows up sloughs and along the banks of the rivers is good feed for them. And a hunter said, if willows are growing bigger, then moose populations will also grow. So on the left, I-2016 of high willows growing Michigan River. So the relationship between local observation of expanding deciduous vegetation and known moose use areas became apparent when we combined the GIS layers for these two data sets. For example, Nushagak, Mulchatna, and Kwijak watersheds are currently considered prime moose habitat by local residents. The region was noted as simultaneously experiencing expanding deciduous vegetation over approximately the last 25 years. And the pink polygons represent known moose use areas according to local knowledge, and the green bordered areas represent areas of expanding deciduous shrubs, mostly willows. Moose harvest data corroborates local knowledge observations that habitat change is occurring which largely benefits moose. Figures show since the late 1990s, moose harvests by local residents have increased significantly in the northern portion of our study area, GMB, 9C, and 17, and during the current decade in the western portion of GMU 18. Southern portion of the study area, which is GMU 18. That's the eastern portion of GMU 18. Knowledge also corroborates these local knowledge accounts. For example, a recent paper by Tape et al. Links increasing range expansion of moose in Alaska's tundra areas and increased shrub habitat. Tape et al. Show a circumpolar-wide northward range extent of moose in relation to increasing shrub habitat across the Arctic. Because various aspects of change, hunters are forced to make adaptations in their behaviors and strategies in order to ensure they have access to important big game resources. Many of the caribou hunting often requires traveling too far to make it worth it these days. Most hunters in the study area, moose are less distant and easily accessible than our caribou today. While residents have always relied on both caribou and moose, prey switching to rely more on increasing moose than difficult to access caribou has been one adaptive response. I want to turn back briefly to the topic of changing winter conditions and how recent inconsistencies in snow and ice conditions have affected hunter access. What winter travel conditions have been like for hunters out there this winter, but last winter saw a solid improvement in travel conditions compared to the previous 4 years. How the observed trend in warmer winters and inconsistent snow and ice conditions continues in future years, the challenges will be serious for subsistence hunters who rely heavily on winter caribou hunts. I'm going to interview quotes which exemplify these concerns. A colleague said, for the last 4 years, we didn't go winter hunting because the weather is too warm, too dangerous to cross rivers. Others said, today we can't travel in winter like we used to. There's always open water in creeks and lakes. It's not freezing up. The adaptive response to not being able to travel in winter is to focus hunting efforts on the fall season rather than the winter season. For example, Dillingham Hunter said, with a lot of snow, we've been relegated to only hunting caribou with skiffs in the fall. Winter hunts, we can't get caribou now. No snow, no access, marginal snow conditions. Some years barely enough snow, other years not enough. People hardly got any caribou. Rivers have not been freezing, so you cannot cross the Wood River to get at them. Snow, but if it's warm and the rivers are not frozen, it doesn't matter if there's snow. And provide a geo-reference depiction of these access concerns for winter hunters. We found winter hunting area information for both caribou and moose into a single set of polygons. And then we layered those winter hunting area polygons over the top of the turquoise polygons depicting areas identified by interview respondents as experiencing abnormal winter conditions over approximately the last 15 years. the light blue polygon areas of shallow or non-dense snow, which are known caribou wintering areas, and thus also important local winter caribou hunting areas. The resulting map provides a picture of the potential access challenges subsistence large land mammal hunters face when consistent winter conditions frequently disallow snow machine travel. Managers maintain legal winter hunts in the study area for both caribou and moose. We asked hunters about current management and regulations. The most common response was to emphasize the importance of these winter hunts for local access to caribou and moose. GMU 17, local hunters and managers often work together to open current registration moose hunts when conditions are optimal for travel. Also made clear that the existence of regulated winter hunts is irrelevant if there is no adequate snow and ice for snow machine transport. For example, Dillingham Hunter said, the existing hunting regulations are fine unless you can make it snow and freeze. In summary, an important takeaway from this study is that local knowledge has improved our understanding of the adaptive considerations subsistence large mammal hunters face in Alaska in relation to the effects of climate change. In the study, I believe the two primary considerations are access and prey switching. We hope results of this project will influence other researchers to make efforts to monitor these variables and also utilize participatory landscape mapping with the potential as a mechanism to both integrate scientific and local knowledge and to bridge the gap between these two different epistemologies. Attending and listening in, and I'll take any questions or comments with whatever we have left. My contact information is there on the screen.
So I'd like to open it up to people on the phone first for questions.
I have a question. Is it because of fauna, the caribou migration?
Well, according to local people, the caribou moved because of a number of different, but primarily they attribute it to grazing. Basically, the herd just got really healthy and it really high, and then it crashed. And that's a normal thing with caribou herds.
Janet Jorgensen, hi. What exactly about the changing climate would make the willows grow so much thicker on the gravel bars?
I'm not a lake ecologist or a climatologist, but basically, there's a lot of studies out there that you can look up that talk about this. So you might want to just Google it, and you'll probably get many references. But the warming allows an increased growth in vegetation because there's a longer growing season. Soil is changing.
Some adaptive advantage to the willows.
Yeah.
To look at the study that I referenced, top it all. Here's this, by the way, if you can see them. That's one on this moon range expansion resulting from increasing shrubs.
It seemed like there must be a connection to hydrology, and you had a little thing about, coded in red, it's with increased sea ice, and I thought this was going to be something you would weave anything that it had something to do with more water in the rivers or something. More pressure, why would there be increased sea ice down there near Togiak?
Yep, actually in our final report we talk about this. The local people do make a connection between erosion and rising waters and rivers and lakes to increasing shrubs. We also talk a lot about as further you get to the coast, the more prevalent this stuff is. So that, but then we also obtained a bunch of information in our final report about the observances of evapotranspiration, a lot of more interior areas away from main water bodies, a lot of drying lakes and ponds. Hydrology stuff, I just didn't have space included today.
Jamie, for clarification, in Togiak Bay, were they seeing an increase in the nearshore sea ice or a decrease in more recent decades? I thought it was a decrease.
Decrease, yes. Right on the coast, so that was just lucky enough to be able to get a little bit of local knowledge data on sea ice change from that particular community. But when we got that, we thought, wow, this is cool. Good topic for other people to pursue with, farther where people are dealing with sea ice issues.
And it matches well with what the scientific observations have been also of sea decreasing through winters, and that includes nearshore ice.
A study like this just on sea ice, I think.
Any questions here in the room?
Hi, this is Twin Hills again. Do you know where we could submit our observations and changes? I know BBNA, we could submit our the check program and stuff like that, and how we could help our hunters, and we could gather surveys and submit to probably Fish and Game or the BBNA tribal governmental agency.
Well, at this assistance, we're always willing to get any information you have, and we'll always use our reporting if we can. So anything you want to give to us will be. And I know here, Gayla Haas at BBNA will certainly work with you on document whatever you have. So we always want to hear. This is the whole point. We want to incorporate local knowledge as much as we can. Also, the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, I don't know where, but they have the LEO program, which is Local Environmental Observers. So check out their website and look at the LEO program. It's really cool. And they have a newsletter, and basically that whole thing is for local people all around Alaska to be reporting their observations.
Is there a question?
Yeah, hi. Neba here calling from Yellowknife. Did you have knowledge of traditional practices that can be incorporated into conservation and management plans to help solve this population decline problem?
Can you one more time? I'm sorry. It was low volume here.
Yeah, so during this study, did you gain any knowledge of traditional practices that can be incorporated into today's management practices to help solve the population decline problem? Anything that the local people have been doing over the years that could be important to help sustain populations?
In regards to conservation of the different species, managers can think about is the primary takeaway for me, which is what this presentation wanted to conclude with, is that assistance hunters, if you study this, there's a lot of information you can get. Especially you can get archaeology, and there's deep history here in this aspect, which I'm prey switching, and there's actually some other people who've talked about it as well. Managers need to pay attention to that certain might change and become important, and then have to manage around that idea. Okay, and then this access issue is the other one that I think local people can contribute to management by just the best they can access and getting managers to align the opportunities with those access things. But it's really complicated. Depending on machines, motorboats, sometimes TVs, and even airplanes. So there's an economic factor to that. So adaptation there is really tricky. Another issue is this, is that I heard from some of the biologists that manage caribou that what happens when all of a sudden they have good snow now, it means that everyone rushes out to hunt caribou on snow machines. And then a really fast, abrupt harvest. And some managers have some conservation concerns about that. Some information.
Yeah.
Is there a record of the big increase in population and decline, kind of that cycle that we're looking at there? Is there a historical record?
Well, I'm not extremely familiar with that, and this is about in the final report. It's well documented. The region where the Chotna caribou herd is had a large caribou herd, probably larger than the Multnomah herd during hundreds. And there's accounts from Russian explorers and oral histories that talk about that. And then it's basically that herd crashed, the Bering Coast herd. It crashed in around the late 1800s. Okay, and then eventually, as you move on, around 100 years or 80 years later, all of a sudden you have this Multnomah herd right up again to this really abundant level. And I think who's one of the famous caribou ecologists of Alaska, I forgot if he do 100 years, but he said caribou cycle around 100 to 80 years up and down. So kind of like snowshoe hares, 10. And understanding is that's pretty prevalent in the caribou herd. So it seems the MPH rise and fall that was is just a more normal sort of thing that happens with caribou. And I think local people, the local all trace it that way. As I said, it's a really important takeaway is that they notice a lot of environmental change, but they're not saying, oh, the habitat changed and all of a sudden the caribou crashed. That's not what they're saying. The number one observation there is that all more moose, but no, didn't change much because of that.
Along those lines, when you're talking about price switching, is there a history of price switching through this, like a long-term price switching through these different phases of caribou abundance, where you can kind of document like big swings in diet?
You just talked on one of, to me, the most fascinating aspects of all this, and I think is really important for everyone, because hunters, man, all of us, to really think about this big picture aspect of this. Long history of human caribou hunters, a real long history. Okay, so Neanderthals in Europe were probably hunters multiple tens of thousands of years ago. In fact, if you have European or Northern Asian blood, you have caribou in your veins. It's been said, some people have said that caribou are the deer that make us human. I can provide some references on this stuff, but look at particularly Europe is a really important example. Okay, if you're familiar with the famous Paleolithic Cro-Magnon caves in Europe, the paintings. Okay, there's tons and tons of depictions of caribou in those caves. Call them reindeer, and those archaeological sites are often dominated by caribou bones. So these people are caribou hunters. Okay, this is going on 50, 40,000 years ago, and those people drew paintings of caribou all over the walls of the caves, and but then the Mesolithic period comes in, which is the Pleistocene Holocene transition. I think that starts 1,000 years ago, maybe this initial warming phase there, and jumps up all the way into the 12,000, 10,000 years ago. But this is the transition from southern Europe being tundra They're all the way into Spain, and it's an environment, caribou habitat. This environment in the Mesolithic becomes forested, okay? So hunters, these fame gathering Cro-Magnon people, probably followed caribou north into Scandinavia, where they still exist now. Some of them ended up domesticating them, right? The Sami people. But some stayed, right? They know that. And what they do, they prey switched, they adapted to a forested environment. And they started hunting red deer or elk, other deer, rabbits, whatever. So it's a major lesson in our history in terms of hunting and subsisting all of this. And it's really important to think about for Alaska, I think, because with this increase, we see sort of an analog. And also, another thing that's important to note is that there's been observations of mule deer moving up from the Yukon into Alaska over the last decade. I know that one, but that's important for me.
Interesting.
Praying is probably, it's probably a million years old, right?
You're not going to go after it. You're going to take what's in your neighborhood.
Yeah, hunt adapt.
Perspective then too is that, and it's not a big deal in Minnesota and crash. There's more, you know, the perspective of people. It's like, yeah, this is what happens in caribou cycle, and we're eating this, we'll miss that. You get sort of people get attached, like, no, we're used to caribou. The last couple decades, 37 caribou, and you know.
Well, yeah, exactly. But we got to think about this in details, all right? We're talking overall sustainability of a system, absolutely, right? But of course, you can be a hunter out in the ice who all of a sudden has no food. So obviously, that probably happened through time. You had these instances of where people couldn't adapt, you know. But overall, of course, we wouldn't today if people weren't adapting through changing climates and changing resources for a long time, right?
Did you see that perspective in the interviews that you do?
Absolutely. In the interview, absolutely. There's an aura of confidence with a lot of indigenous hunters. You know, everywhere that I went, there's genuine aura of confidence that they portray. They'll talk about things that are happening. They'll express their concerns about it. Always hear a solid level of confidence from them. And I think embedded in a hunting and gathering culture, because forever they've been dealing with hard changes and different crazy conditions and things they have to deal with, and they ate it. They've made it through. Well, that's not to discount what's going on now. I mean, things are getting much more complex, and like I said, the trucks issue that also has to be thrown in is that access now requires motorized transportation, and that is also something that needs to be thought about.
So we're about out of time. Take one more question.
I have one.
Anyone else on the phone first?
No, Chris.
Okay, Liana?
I'm curious about what your plans to share this out with all the folks that you interviewed and that were part of this.
Yeah, so what we're going to do after we get this report, the final report, ready, we're going to do some summary sheets to kind of sort out the different topics. And one of them is going to be geared towards local people to talk about doing mapping and how valuable it is, and hopefully initiating them to do some of it on their own. So yeah, I'm to create a product like that.
And I'll also say that me and his colleagues went back out with the first round of maps that were produced as a result of this work to the original and sure that they were representing them correctly.
We tried a few full community review of everything we do at the Division of Subsistence. We all have our data viewed by the people that we worked with, the local people. We
will close this up. If everything worked well, we will have this on recording, and it will be posted on our website here in the near future. A little bit of minor editing, and then we'll have that set up. Thank you very much for joining us. Look for the